Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to your second topic of this week in World Civilizations 1. As I mentioned last time, we're finally going to wrap up sort of the turn of the millennium stuff by looking at one of the more significant empires in world history, the Mongols. Now, I know a few of you are considering writing your final essays or doing your final projects on some sort of imperial theme. You would be remiss not to consider adding the Mongols. They'd be a great third topic to sort of conclude your analysis with. But anyway, before we get into that, we'll of course talk about the key terms. I am going to of course define the Mongols more as a people, what they were like. We will of course talk about the most famous or infamous Mongol of all time, Genghis Khan. We'll look at the Mongol Empire itself and sort of its extent and effect on the world. And we'll look at two of the more significant post-Khan Mongol leaders, Hulagu and Kublai Khan. In the meantime, though, of course, I want to remind you once again of your important upcoming dates. I won't spend really much time on these because I did mention them last time, but if you have any questions about them, please feel free to email me as soon as you can, or join my office hours if I am available. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the actual Mongols. The Mongol peoples were originally a forest and steppe-dwelling hunter and herder group, nomadic naturally, who primarily inhabited the inner Eurasia region. For those of you who don't know much about world geography, which I don't blame you, I really don't know that much either, actually, you could argue, that would consist of group portions of Northern Europe and Northern Asia. One of the things that set the Mongols apart from other nomadic groups we've discussed is they very quickly formed one of the most deadly and efficient militaries of the ancient world. A couple of reasons historians and anthropologists have identified for this. For one, they contained a high protein diet. That probably makes no sense to word it like that, but who cares? The die has been cast and all that. Arguably, it's been argued that this actually built up a heavy muscle mass, making them literally stronger and more effective soldiers. However, one of the main things that set them apart was their impressive technology. For example, the Mongols wielded heavy compound bows, which were accurate at over 200 yards. These are made of sinew, wood, and horn primarily. They also had quite advanced saddles for the time, which contained supports at the front and back, which would let the rider move at quite high speeds. Finally, they also had iron stirrups, which would allow the soldier to stand up while riding horseback in order to fire his arrow without stopping. So again, very efficient and deadly military force. To give you a bit of what their family and society was like before they became an empire, they were very tribal-based, like many other groups we've talked about, and were initially just a loose confederation of family ties. Your family would have a loyalty to whatever tribe you were a part of, and those tribes would have some sort of kinship or alliances based on various kinships. Women in Mongol society had sort of actually a mixed bag, but much better, you could argue, than other civilizations we've discussed. For example, like other civilizations, the Mongol women were given in marriage to make alliances and were typically considered to be responsible for taking care of the children, livestock, and making clothing for the fellow Mongols. However, Mongol women were also allowed to fight on various occasions in their various wars, and were allowed to own their own property, and were allowed to divorce of their own volition. So again, bit of a mixed bag, but women did have some advantages. Now, to get more specifically into what I want to look at today, let's talk about Chinggis, or as he's more commonly known, Genghis Khan, and the initial conquest of the Mongol Empire. In 1206, Temujin, as he was known at the time, later Genghis Khan of course, was able to finally unite the Mongol tribes and become their new Khan, or supreme ruler. He was later, of course, mainly known as Genghis Khan, and one of the things that initially set him apart with his policies was that he actually picked his advisors and generals without any regard to clan affiliation. So instead of just picking his buddies from his own home clan, he would pick the best he could find from various clans. Now, why might that be a good decision? Very good, viewers at home. This might be especially familiar with some of you who are familiar with the nepotism of Andrew Jackson's government, for instance. Ideally, this policy should have two effects. One, like I said, it can help ensure that you're picking the best advisors you possibly can. Instead of just limiting yourself to one clan, you're drawing from every clan available, which again, ideally should at least lead to you having higher quality advisors. Also, this shows that despite Genghis Khan, as you might know, being primarily known for his conquests, and quite frankly for all the children he had, and the fact that I think there's literally about a 1 or 2% chance you're related to him, he also was quite an effective administrator. Since he has now, of course, just united the Mongol tribes, you could, of course, suggest that it's not a very close alliance yet. So by drawing advisors and generals from multiple clans, he can encourage more cooperation and make every clan feel included. If he had just picked from his own clan, it might dissatisfy the others, lead to civil war. However, because of this method, Khan was able to become quite a successful conqueror and later led campaigns across China, Afghanistan, and Persia. Now, to help you get a better understanding of some of the complexities of Genghis Khan's rule, let's first look at some of his political and social actions he took while in power. After Genghis Khan became the Khan, he abolished inherited aristocratic titles. No one would have any jobs or nobility just because of their birth. He forbade the selling and kidnapping of women in his empire, and he outlawed selling Mongols into slavery. He created a writing system and held a census. He gave diplomats diplomatic immunity, and he allowed freedom of religion throughout his empire. Now, to look at some of the positives potentially of Genghis Khan, why might some of these things benefit the world? Awkward pause. I know. I love them as much as you do. Alright. Hopefully you had time to look at some of them yourself, but let's go through just a couple of them one at a time. As you might imagine, abolishing aristocratic titles that are inherited is again a great way to encourage more cooperation and higher quality servants or allies. If people know that some people aren't just going to get a leg up because of their birth, and anyone's able to become some sort of great general or leader in the Mongol Empire, it can encourage more participation and again potentially attract people who are more qualified than someone who would have just been born into it. These two are of course pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend much time on them, but the creating a writing system is a pretty good review for previous civilizations. If Khan's conquering so much of the world, why might having a universal writing system be effective? Very good, I'll give you a short pause on that one. Hopefully that one's pretty straightforward. If you all have a universal writing system, it allows everyone across this empire to communicate. Diplomatic immunity is, of course, a very interesting concept, which, for those of you who don't know, essentially means that a diplomat to another country is immune from being charged from a variety of crimes. For example, if you've ever watched a crime show or a crime movie involving a diplomat, I guarantee you there was a scene where the diplomat just parked his car wherever he wanted or wherever she wanted, because they are immune from parking tickets as part of diplomatic immunity. This, as you might imagine, could again show Khan's potential skills as an administrator. It can show other countries that he's open to negotiating and forming alliances, and he's not just going to cut your diplomat's head off if you send them for negotiation. And of course, like many other empires we discussed, because of this multicultural nature and diverse nature, Khan essentially had no choice but to allow freedom of religion, because it would, of course, be very hard to convince all these vast numbers of religious people to give up and join one state religion. Now, to get into more of the complexities and negative sides of Genghis Khan's rule, let's look at his violence. According to historian John Mann, during Khan's conquest of the Xia kingdom in China, he decimated it to the point that only academic experts are able to know anything about them because so little of a record is left of their society. So again, essentially wiped out entirely an entire culture and civilization. As a whole, after the Mongols arrived, according to the Mongol census, the Chinese population went down from about 50 million to 8.5 million. While, of course, many of them were killed by natural causes, as you might imagine, quite a few of these, as you can see here, were killed during Mongol conquests. When in the Middle East, during the invasion of Iran and Persia, it is recorded that Khan killed the urban populations of the cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, Herat, Tus, and Neshabur, probably pronouncing that incorrectly. To add insult to injury, during these invasions, unskilled workers who were captured would be used as human shields in later campaigns. So the Mongols in Khan would take the skilled workers and use their labor, but the unskilled ones who really weren't beneficial would be used as shields. Finally, throughout the entire Iranian peninsula, according to historian Stephen Ward, potentially 3/4 of the population, or about 10 to 15 million people on the entire peninsula, were killed throughout the course of these campaigns. So again, extraordinarily violent individual, you could argue. However, this did lead to a very massive eventual empire size, consisting of about 11 to 12 million acres, which is actually the largest, roughly the size of Africa, and the largest empire in history. So this, of course, raises the question, and one that we've discussed many, many times. How exactly should Genghis Khan be remembered in history? Let's compare him to Alexander the Great, for example. Should he be known as a great unifier and a great leader, or is he just a bloodthirsty tyrant? Alright, that one, of course, I won't give it too much of a pause for that one, because, of course, that one I have to mainly leave up to you. But be prepared to discuss this in future assignments. It, of course, is one of the main historical questions you're going to have to ask yourself about any topic. Do potential benefits that go along with some leader or some government outweigh some of the atrocities that might have been undergone to allow this government to be possible? Is a large empire like this worth all the bloodshed? Similar questions can be asked about Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, or really anything you're going to study throughout history. So that's why I like to bring up questions like this. They're really never going to go away. But in the meantime, let's look at some of the later conquests of the Mongols. After Genghis Khan died, these conquests did actually continue. For example, in the 1250s, Genghis Khan's grandson, Mongol Khan, which it almost sounds like I'm saying Donkey Kong, but I swear I wasn't trying to, he sent his brother Hulagu to conquer the rest of Iran, Syria, Egypt, Byzantium, and Armenia. By 1258, Hulagu had reached Abbasid Baghdad with his troops of 200,000 facing only 10,000 defenders. As you might imagine, this led to a very brutal sack and one of the most devastating defeats in world history. Hulagu, probably exaggerating, but claimed to have killed 200,000 people alone. An Iraq historian at the time recorded that blood flowed from the gutters into the streets, and the same thing happened in the mosques throughout the city. So again, devastating loss of life. And at the conclusion of this invasion, the Caliph of the Abbasid civilization was rolled up in a carpet and trampled by horses. So again, very violent overthrow. These invasions continued throughout East Asia. Throughout the 1260s, Kublai Khan, another grandson of Genghis Khan, used borrowed gunpowder technology to seize northern China from the Song dynasty. The capital, Hangzhou, fell by 1276. Now, one thing that's interesting to note is that unlike Iraq, or like Baghdad, the Dowager Empress at the time in the city was spared, and Hangzhou remained as one of the greatest cities in Asia and really throughout the entire world. For example, Marco Polo claimed in his travels that the European and Islamic worlds had nothing like this great city. Now, one of the reasons this might be the case, and a point of comparison I'd like to point out, is the nature of Mongol rule in China. Once in China, Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, which was based in their new capital city of Khanbalik, later known as Beijing. Now, one of the things that characterized this rule is that the Mongols ruled over a Chinese majority. So even though the Mongols are now in charge, ethnic Chinese people still outnumber them. Why is that a big deal? Very good. Again, those of you who are paying attention, we've talked about Islamic empires. When you rule over a majority, you typically can't be as controlling or authoritarian as you would be if you're the majority. Because even though you're now technically in charge and your military was powerful enough to defeat people who outnumbered you, you still could have to deal with very serious rebellions if you try to impose your will completely on a majority. In Abbasid Baghdad, the Mongols again didn't really have that problem. They outnumbered their defenders by 190,000 troops at least, which of course could allow them to be much more brutal. In China, that's not really an option, which again should reflect the difficulties in a minority empire trying to control a majority. Because of this, the Chinese elites were still allowed to control most things locally, and the Mongols would just oversee everything from their capital. So again, Still a lot of Chinese control because of this majority. Now, to get a little bit into the decline, Mongol society did, of course, decline, as you might imagine. While it did stay strong for a while, with Kublai Khan eventually conquering Burma and Yunnan, with his descendants eventually going from Vietnam to Syria, Korea, and even all the way to Poland. For those of you who don't know a ton about world geography, Poland is actually right on the border of Western Germany and is just on the of Europe and is just on the eastern border of the country of Germany. So this empire was so successful, it was able to reach all the way into the very edge of Christian Europe. However, in Kublai's time, things did already start to decline. Kublai Khan is essentially seen to be sort of the extent and the height of Mongol expansion. For example, in 1274 and 1281, Kublai Khan had 2 failed invasions in Japan, which, as you can see in this depiction right here, was partly because of the weather on the coast and just due to the defenders themselves. He also failed to defeat the Egyptian civilization of the Mamluks in the west and was not able to expand any farther into Arabia. Over time, as a result of these failures, the Mongols were forced to give up portions of their empire to local rulers, and Mongol rule in China and Persia had essentially collapsed by the 14th century. This, of course, as you might imagine, is very similar to Alexander the Great's empire. Just like the Mongols, Alexander the Great's successors fought over the spoils, and it started to split up into smaller local rulers and smaller empires. However, many would argue that Genghis Khan is still a bit more successful, because he did literally conquer more than Alexander the Great ever did, but his empire also did at the very least last to his grandchildren and up into his great-grandchildren. So while due to its rapid conquest, it wasn't quite as long-lasting as other empires we've studied, it was still a bit more successful and long-lasting, you could argue, than Alexander the Great. But in the meantime, let's look a little bit more at the effects of Mongol conquest on the United World, or on the world itself. I kind of gave myself away a little bit, didn't I? But like Alexander the Great, these vast conquests across various multicultural groups helped to lead to a more united world, just like Hellenism had done. Couple of long-term effects. One of the potentially negative ones, you could argue, depending on your perspective, is the decline of Islamic power. But after this, after Baghdad was conquered, there was really no more central caliphate or powerful center for Islam like Baghdad had been. Of course, to this day, still in the Middle East, there are various Islamic countries, but none of them have like the same overarching authority and loyalty of the entire Islamic world like Baghdad did. For multicultural influences, Persia, Islamic, and Byzantine influences were now introduced to China's art, architecture, and medicine due to all the increased travel and trade, and the religious tolerance of the Yuan dynasty was quite impressive as well, with various Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and Islamic beliefs now becoming more prominent in Chinese culture as well. And again, due to this humongous empire, it was able to connect Africa, Europe, and Asia, with an increase in trade and technology along all the Silk Roads. So again, big uniting force. So, to wrap things up, one thing I'd like you to think about going into the end of the semester: did the Mongol Empire have a positive or negative effect on the world? How should we really remember them throughout world history? But yeah, in the meantime, that's of course something I'll let you chew on as you go out throughout the rest of your week. Just again, please remember your upcoming reminders and assignments, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.